Obviously, the big news this week is the cancellation of the release of The Interview. Sony Pictures pulling the plug on that after threats of physical terrorism evoking 9/11 were sent to the studio and threatening those who would exhibit the movie. A number of theater chains then exercised their option to not show the movie, basically leading Sony no other option than just cancel it, because only, I think, a few theaters were willing to show it.
Yep.
So we've had a big discussion about what will they do next, and Sony also said we have no further plans for the release of this movie, including DVD and VOD. So we have a whole discussion about that.
We may be one of a few hundred people that have seen this.
Roth and I have both seen this movie, and we enjoyed it. Roth's review is up on the site. It's a funny movie, but and I said this in our previous discussion, that I think eventually the movie made about what happened to this movie will be a better movie than The Interview. I mean, it's fascinating.
It's got to be I feel like it needs to be a 10-episode series on cable to
and
really
oddly
capture.
Enough, Aaron Sorkin would probably be a good one for this, despite raking the media over the coals for this, which that's a whole other thing. But there is one particular aspect of this case that I find really should make Americans really think hard and think about sort of our reaction to the cancellation of this movie. I did feel that the kind of reactions that I was seeing online were overly simplistic. It isn't, obviously it was a chilling day for free speech, for artists' right to express themselves. However, their art, the problem that I find that Rogen and Goldberg, one of the problems they had was they're creating art that they don't own. Their art, ultimately the expression of what they want to say is owned by somebody else, and in this case, it is a Japanese corporation. So, in one facet that only it seems like now people are talking about is that perhaps some of these threats weren't necessarily directed at American theater-going audiences, but audiences possibly in Japan. Even though I understand that The Interview wasn't even going to get released in Asia, Japan is only a few hundred miles away from North Korea, and they have very tense relations already with nuclear tests going off. I mean, I guess my question ultimately is, does an American's right to expression extend to their product being owned by another country and other countries possibly bearing the brunt of we need to express ourselves artistically?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of complex issues with this particular thing. I mean, number one, we don't even know what was said, like we've seen all the emails leading up to it as a result of the hack, but we don't know what was said to actually make this, to force it to stop. So Sony came out and they basically said, theater owners, you can make the decision, or theater chains, you can make the decision whether you're going to air it or not, or you're going to screen it or not. And, largely they came back and said, we don't have confidence, even though the feds had kind of said, we think this is a low risk.
But the feds were talking of threats to America.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't even want, like the foreign thing is what I'm getting to right now. You don't know where that message came from. It's not necessarily coming from America. It could have been something that came down from Japan. Japan very, very rarely gets involved. You mean the message to pull the movie? Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Japan rarely gets involved with Sony Pictures. It's, it's pretty laissez-faire. But when they do, it's always for something that's big. And, you don't think, I mean, you got to think that everybody was on board for this decision.
Yeah.
Like, this is a world-changing decision. And, it does feel like people are getting bullied by, terrorist tactics, but there's a lot of things to consider, including the safety of people.
I think that this is how the layers and just how intricate and complicated the situation is hasn't even really fully hit us yet, because it's so unprecedented.
Yeah.
We, as an organization, have talked a lot about how we're going to handle things like the leaks about information about upcoming movies and things like that. That is not anything we've ever had to face or contend with before and wrestle with in terms of what is in integrity, what is not, what's legally in bounds and what is not. And I think we've handled it well, but every organization is sort of dealing with that, and I think some have not handled it well, frankly, because ultimately, even if an email comes out...
Does it rhyme with hawker?
Well, I think that even if a series of emails, not just them, many organizations, a series of emails show people to be kind of jerks. That is a total invasion of their privacy. It's illegal. They were private email. I mean, it's just a very complicated issue. But swinging back to this, the parent corporation in Japan could have been the one to make the call. As far as we know, it could have been the U.S. government that finally said, we don't need an international incident over a Seth Rogen movie. You need to pull the plug on this movie right now. And end this and stop this insanity, because no matter what, and I think it is very complicated, because I do not like the idea of hackers being able to bully their way into getting what they want, because that's a horrible precedent to set.
I mean, they did win yesterday.
It's a horrible precedent to set, and that is very problematic, not just for Hollywood, but for every organization.
For the games industry too, maybe.
For the games industry, for any conceivable organization that can be hacked. This is now a very big problem, and it's already starting to have an effect. Things like Carell's movie. However.
Just in case you guys don't know, Steve Carell and Gore Verbinski had a movie set in North Korea called
Pyongyang.
Pyongyang. Sorry, I blanked on it. And that has now been canceled as a result of everything going on.
I don't think there's any single easy answer to any of this, and I certainly understand passionate feelings on all sides of the equation. For me personally, not a single human life anywhere on the planet is worth risking.
It's an emotional issue beyond anything, right? I'm sorry to cut you off. It's an emotional issue.
Damn it! Isn't anybody willing to die for James Franco?
but beyond that, like, I do think that there's something really, I mean, there's definitely clearly something fundamentally American about right to free speech. And since this is like, hey, this is being curtailed as the, sort of, I saw a lot of people quoting yesterday, we don't negotiate with terrorists, but we'll, listen to their demands. I think it's just so, you nailed it. It's not a simple thing. And I don't think we even have all the information. I don't think we're going to get all the information. If the government was truly the one to say, hey, pull the plug on this, we'll never know that, or we won't know that for like 50 years.
I mean, the thing is, too, there's also, it's not just Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, Franco, everybody involved with the making of the interview who have lost something in this. And I do feel for them. This is their movie. But there were also thousands of employees at Sony, people who did nothing except go to work, who've now had their identity stolen, credit card information, like their lives, day-to-day lives are impacted. Going for a car loan now is going to be a nightmare.
Friends of ours.
And friends of ours. And it's like, do their lives really have to be overturned like this just so Seth Rogen can have a movie that was tracking to open at 25 million? And I'm just playing devil's advocate on that one.
But I think it's unfair to say, I truly think it's unfair to say that Sony should have been able to predict something that has never happened before. Nothing on this scale has ever happened before.
They did know that this was definitely going to cause an incident. The war drums have been beating on this one for over a year.
They have.
But I don't think I think people just thought it was saber rattling, and then it actually happened.
If you look at a series, this is my big concern. Look, there's been, we've talked about this a lot. There have been films that went after high-profile political figures forever. The most recent and most prominent ones that I can think of is Team America, which has also now been pulled from theaters. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. Maybe there's something about animated figures that makes it more palatable. I'm not sure, but they couldn't have known that it would go this far. Did they know they were doing something risky? Yes. But my concern is that think about how many movies come out that people boycott and protest every year. Now, if everyone just gets really good at hacking, does that eventually mean that they're, I mean, is it, you said this earlier, does it become society is its own big brother?
It's already there, I mean, to some extent. But I think...
Don't we already self-police ourselves in everything we say?
I think this is a different kind of warfare, and it's a warfare on culture and sort of like disparate cultures that have different beliefs. Like, you may see this more because it's an effective way to get at something, like... Sony is reeling right now. They are not sitting, they're probably not planning their holiday parties right now. They're in full crisis mode and probably will be for quite some time. And that's
if they recover.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll be okay ultimately, but like I think this is definitely unprecedented and one of the biggest things we've ever seen. And now everybody in the world knows it's a tool they can use, and that's what's scary to me. Is that like, wow, if hacking is the next frontier of warfare, there's a lot of scary things that could be revealed. You know, think about like. Think about any email that you send.
Transportation systems.
Period.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want every email you've ever sent to be bubbled up. But not only that, think about like if
well,
think about your email. No, like in the like government emails, stuff like that. Like, admittedly, Sony is supposed to be had some security issues, but. Who knows? I mean, there's holes everywhere. You know, if a hacker's talented, they get in.
We've already seen that happen, certainly with like Julian Assange, you know, and Snowden. We've already seen sort of government hacks, government level hacks, and this is
interesting to bring that up. I'll let you finish.
Well, this is obviously a private sector hack. You know what I mean? And it does very much concern me that decisions about a corporation's goals, what they're willing to release, what they're willing to say, is now being controlled by an organization outside of them.
Yeah,
at the
criminals.
By criminals, and it is really scary. I agree with you. Like, it is really, really scary to think about getting hacked yourself, and I understand wanting to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So there's just no simple answer to any of this.
Yeah.
Except we need better protections.
Yeah, I feel like one of the big oversimplifications I saw yesterday was just keep saying that it's you know, art losing out. It did, but there's a really huge reason why it lost that particular argument, and I feel like people need to. I guess the point of my bringing this up is really more like, in a weird way, it should make us think about the effect that art, particularly stuff that we make in America, can have on other countries. And does our right to express ourselves trump the right of people in Japan to go to the movies without worrying about getting shot for something or blown up for something they didn't have anything to do with?
It also does a lot to showcase the power of art. Like, this is something that has now moved a lot of things in the world, and you know, we've been talking about it for weeks already, and will continue to. I think this is like the beginning of something or the end of something, you know.
I will say that I certainly understand, you know, if I put myself in the position of thinking about if that was my president, if that was my leader being depicted this way, in this manner, and we don't want to say this, you know, it's...
Well, there was a movie a couple of years ago, Death of a President, where it was a fictitious thing about the assassination of George Bush, and it was right during the height of the sort of the backlash against the wars and everything, and that movie caught a lot of flack.
Which and again, understandably so. That was a drama. I will say though that was a dramatic movie. I mean, there was no.
It was.
I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying that the subject they chose to tackle in the interview wasn't inherently offensive to a large majority of people, you know.
But it could have been offensive, though, to people of North Korea being kind of, I don't know, I just feel like the overall, the approach to the movie, and I guess the point I'm getting at is, this is ultimately, you know, a movie that was, I'm having trouble finding the words, but basically, they didn't seem to think of the consequences that this could have on people who are not Americans,
I think they didn't think about that.
You know, I mean, there's a racial component to it too, because this is a movie made by white people, starring white people, that affects Asian lives.
Right.
You know, there's a whole other component to that too. You know?
Having seen the movie, and this is something that I pointed out in my review as well, though I will say this: yes, it is inherently offensive. They are inherently offensive. Look at any movie that they make. They are inherently offensive.
Freedom of speech is meant to be offensive, and you have to live with it. Yeah.
Or at least a choice to be offensive.
Role, like, and
it's not just
I hate to do this, but I'm about to do this. Like, if you look at Shakespeare, the role of the royal fool is to be the truth teller. It's to be the person. That's what comedians do.
Right.
They are able to say the things that are hard to hear that are also true because they're couched in humor. And so, am I saying that the interview necessarily did that? Not necessarily, but it goes after the media, it goes after the U.S. government, and it goes after
Korea.
Yeah,
nobody quite looks good in the movie. Everyone kind of comes off bad.
Everybody's an idiot. Everybody's an idiot
Not
in this
that
movie.
puppy. There's an adorable puppy in Act 3.
You will never see the adorable
Oh my God.
That is the best puppy I've ever seen.
That puppy better, I would have said it should have gotten an Oscar, but it's never going to happen.
It's the best puppy acting I've ever seen. It rivals the Inside Llewyn Davis, Llewyn Davis cat acting.
Better than Old Yeller?
But yes, I think you're right. It's again, there's no easy answer because yes, it is those things and it is offensive and you need to think about the effects of what you're doing as a creator.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that is comedy's role to some degree.
We also though live in a time when cartoonists are being killed for writing cartoons that a huge swath of the world's population finds offensive and is against their rules. And comedians in the Middle East are being killed for exactly doing that, playing the fool, making fun of the leader. I believe it was in Syria it happened. So we are living in a time when, hey, it's just a joke, doesn't save your life.
Well, it shows that art is shows power for change because people are afraid of it. But it also is like, this particular thing is kind of like a holy man, you know, especially for the U.S. We can make something that, you know, is really going to have global ramifications. And I don't buy that they didn't know what they had because Rogen had said several times, like, this is going to start some stuff.
Yeah, they knew. I think they really just didn't. I think they thought it would be, I mean, the closest sort of backlash that I can think of never got to this level, but like, Last Temptation of Christ was hugely controversial at that time. I remember that well. And Passion of the Christ, obviously. And at least in Passion's case, it came out at a time when there were still indie studios that were edgy enough to take on a movie like that. We don't have a new market anymore. And Goldman and I talked about this in our conversation about how ultimately maybe the only way this is going to get a theatrical release is if a small distributor like an A24, an Open Road, or Roadside Attractions, somebody who doesn't have some huge infrastructure and thus less to lose, this could be a boon for them, and Sony can be like, at least it got out there, you know?
I'm getting content it's not for sale.
Yeah, I don't think it's.
Do you think this is going to be like that Jerry Lewis movie that basically sits in a vault?
For years.
I don't think it's for sale, but I don't think it's going to sit in the vault. I think it's going to. I think it'll leak. And
I mean, think about it. There were already Academy screeners of it out there, so there are pristine qualities.
Someone will leak this movie, and it will be one of the most, if not the most, downloaded movie ever.
His name Reth Sogan.
I mean, somebody's definitely going to leak the movie. I mean, that's where the irony I think is ultimately going to be
piracy can beat hacking.
That piracy,
that's friggin' amazing.
Yeah, I think the
piracy is the hero.
Yeah, the pirates will win. You know, like I think ultimately what's going to be ironic is that the whole goal was to stop people from seeing it. Ostensibly speaking, we actually
now more people than ever
don't definitively know that that's even true yet. Like we don't know that for
and there are clearly inside people helping them. There's
But ostensibly speaking, the whole goal is to stop people from seeing this film, and probably eventually more people will see this film than ever would have otherwise.
Yeah. Yep.
One last thing I do want to say about it is that is just gone right the hell out of my head. Alamo Drafthouse was willing to show. They were willing to show the movie until it got pulled. They also were going to show Team America. Now that has been pulled, so
because
it's like
Paramount
you can't even have
them to
It's like now you can't even have your protest backup movie. It's like at this point, it's down to The Great Dictator or
Action Jackson.
Action Jackson.
Just because you should go see Action Jackson.
My concern is that, and I think you guys probably touched on this. Ultimately, is that we get very watered down, very safe.
That was the point I wanted to say. Thank you for bringing it back. Yes.
From now on and.
Unlike the Risk-A-Shit.
I agree from the studio perspective. I do think it's going to make people in boardrooms take a pause and say, how do we want to portray this thing? On the flip side, maybe people will be pissed off enough about the free speech thing that they come out even harder on the indie side. Everything is self-made these days, and I think there are going to be a lot of people who are like, hey, this was a huge slap to the face of free speech, and people might take it upon themselves to make their own things that are.
I think so, but we're talking about also if studios, the foreign markets are becoming more and more, movies are being made more and more for them, and they were already breaking it down to the most simple, spectacular kind of elements of like giant robots fighting. It's just about
like that
spectacle.
moment in Birdman. I don't know if have you seen it yet.
No.
So there's a moment in Birdman that just creates the perfect,
the
ridiculous Hollywood moment, and it is glorious.
It is pretty much like their middle finger tribute to Michael Bay in one long shot. But I do think that this will have. We already saw it with like Transformers: Age of Extinction, this kind of kowtowing to foreign markets in the very like heavy-handed and really shoehorned in way that you could see it in that movie with the scene set in Hong Kong. I think we're going to see even more of that, and you're going to see, I think Hollywood's going to become even more risk-adverse, and they were already real wussies about that stuff.
Yeah.
Like you're going to see more giant robots, more like supernatural creatures and stuff like that, and superheroes, which is, we're already getting that, so,
I think we've been going towards, and it's been this way for a while, where the risky thing is TV these days.
Yeah.
And I think it'll stay that way and probably get
even
even more disparate in that way. And you know what, I'm fine with that. I don't actually mind that much going to the movies to see like the big things and then staying home and watching the more personal things, because people like HBO and Netflix and Amazon are now releasing movies, and they could release movies like this and probably not have nearly the craziness of this.
That's true. I mean, it's funny because we were joking early at lunch, wouldn't it be great if South Park had a new episode coming out?
Right,
they would just go right at it.
I'm surprised they don't come out of the season and be like, we're doing one more.
We're doing one more, kids.
Get the band back together.
We're doing one for Rogen. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I do think you'll see it more on television, but at the same time, speaking of South Park, there was a threat against Viacom because of a South Park episode a couple years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, also there's a whole, none of these companies want to be on the hook for lawsuits if something happens. Yes, people still went to the movies after the Aurora shootings, but there were a lot of lawsuits, and there was a lot of fallout from that, and that was just one nut. What if it was an organized effort? Imagine five guys with guns or vests, whatever, walk into theaters all across the country, Muncie, Indiana, Topeka, Florida, somewhere. I mean, you're not going to go into Manhattan or LA where the theaters are going to be loaded with cops expecting something. That would cripple the industry, and it would scare people off of going.
Well, number one, there's a financial impact, but I think we have to remember that people who run studios are also people. They don't want people to get hurt either. Like ultimately, a lot of people are cynical about it. It comes down to dollars and cents, and it does. They're running a business, but nobody wants to be responsible for human lives being lost either. So I think there's a human element that we also don't think about. Like, I'm pretty sure that people at Sony were like stressed out that people could die because of the decisions they made.
Well, there's an argument, though, that psychologists have that many CEOs are actually high-functioning sociopaths. That aside,
the fact that stocks did dwindle.
There's probably a lot of people, of course, if you were in that position, would you want to take the risk of one single person getting killed over this? No.
I put myself in the shoes of the person making that call, and I was like, even in minor ways, I wouldn't want to like expose anybody that I work with to... work with, or like any of our readers or viewers or anything like that. I wouldn't want to expose anybody to any sort of threat of violence or actual violence. So it comes down to the human level too.
I mean, this is a larger discussion for later, but what it's got me thinking about really is, like, we were talking about this, is that my concern too is that any given issue there seems to be such an extreme reaction to these days. I mean, anything seems to provoke a level of ire and anger that is completely...
In a black or white response. It is either this or it is either that. There's no room for nuance.
And that's kind of my concern in general, is that as a global culture, we head more and more in that direction. So how do you respond to that? How do you have dialogue in that? Like, why must the door be closed on anything that is upsetting to you? You know what I mean?
Well, I saw a lot of people evoking 9/11 as some sort of trump card to end the argument yesterday. Like, we didn't stop doing this or that after 9/11. I'm like, we actually we didn't handle 9/11 too well. I don't know why we've somehow retroactively rewritten history that we handled it like we were the greatest generation. A lot of stuff went wrong, you know. Yeah. But I think we're getting a little far afield of the overall topic. Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is a very long segment, and we're going to be talking about this.
Not simple, I think, was how
not
we kicked
simple.
it off.
And basically, the whole point of this was to say that there's a lot more here than just freedom of speech and just artistic expression, even though it certainly took a real, you know, there was a fatality yesterday at the intersection of art and commerce.
Yeah. And there's certainly understandably heated, passionate feelings all over this thing. Yeah. You know.
Well, we're going to be talking about the interview a lot more in the days, weeks, and possibly even years ahead.